Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Spencer Ruckdy. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm the author events manager here at Third Place Books in Seattle, Washington. We are so happy to have Julia Glass with us today, discussing her new book, Vigil Harbor, in conversation with her editor, Deborah Garrison. First of all, I just want to say that of all the professionals in the publishing industry that authors get to interact with, editors are by far the people with whom authors have the most intimate relationships, both personally and with their work, which is why I'm really excited for today's unique discussion and this little peek behind the curtain with Julia and Deborah. Now, I do want to invite you to use the chat window at the bottom of your screen to say hello and tell us where you're calling in from. And while you're doing that, we have a stellar lineup of virtual and in-person events this season. On June 13th, we're teaming up with Community Bookstore in Brooklyn and Exile in Bookville in Chicago to host Jesse Jazuska Stevens, who is the author of The Visitors, in conversation with recent Pulitzer winner Josh Cohen. And at the end of this month, on June 28th, we have Kira Jane Buxton, with whom we'll be celebrating the paperback release of Feral Creatures here at our Lake Forest Park store. You can find our full events calendar and sign up for our email newsletter at thirdplacebooks.com. As I mentioned, the chat window at the bottom of your window is open, and we encourage you to use it respectfully. I want to remind you that during the last 15 minutes or so of tonight's programming, we will also have time for your questions. So if you have questions for our author this evening, please submit those to the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen, which is separate from the chat window. We offer closed captioning for those who are interested. Just click live transcripts at the bottom of your window to turn this feature on or off. A reminder that this event will be recorded. So if you missed anything, we'll be emailing this recording to everyone who registered. And of course, you can order Vigil Harbor from Third Place Books online, or you can stop by any one of our locations at Lake Forest Park, Ravenna, or Seward Park in Seattle. Every purchase you make supports the future of this author series, so thank you. And now, without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce today's speakers. Julia Glass is the author of 6 previous books of fiction, including the best-selling 3 Junes, which was the winner of the National Book Award, and I See You Everywhere, winner of the Binghamton University John Gardner Fiction Book Award, a recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Julia Glass is a senior distinguished writer in residence at Emerson College. Joining her in conversation tonight is her editor, Deborah Garrison, who is the poetry editor for Knopf and a senior editor of fiction at Pantheon Books, where her authors include Heather Clark, Mary Gateskill, David Grossman, Robin Cost-Lewis, Sharon Olds, Kevin Young, and of course, Julia. She is the author of the collections A Working Girl Can't Win and Other Poems, and The Second Child. And prior to working at Knopf and Pantheon in 2000, she was a senior editor at The New Yorker. Tonight, Julia and Deborah are discussing Vigil Harbor, which is Julia's 6th book since her acclaimed novel, 3 Junes. The New York Times Book Review writes that Vigil Harbor is sprawling and engrossing. Glass is a masterful builder of fictional people, an expert at charting the architecture of entire lives. It continues that Vigil Harbor transcends the mood of collective but cloistered worry and becomes a novel about what remains. We are so pleased to bring these two to your screen this evening. Please join me in welcoming Julia and Deborah.
Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you, and it's so wonderful to be here with you, Julie. And I feel as though, we have our relationship, and it's often just the 2 of us, but now we have a few people listening, so we can talk about how this book came to be and how we work together and have worked together, but also work together, especially on this book, which was a little bit different. So I'm hoping.
Sorry, Deb, I'm just going to interrupt. It sounds like you might be echoing a little bit. You might have 2 screens open.
Yeah, you weren't before, so.
Is there a fix for that? I mean, should I mute and unmute again?
Yeah, try muting and unmuting.
Okay, how do I sound?
Still echoing a little bit. Try leaving the Zoom and then coming right back in, and it should fix it.
Okay, let's see. How do I do this?
You were fine before. You were fine when we were chatting before.
And all I did was mute and come back. That's strange. Okay, I'm going to leave and try to rejoin. Sorry about this. Julie, while I do that, will you read the first read the two opening paragraphs of the novel. Sorry, I'm echoing, I'm sure to you. Open with a little, just so we hear the set the tone of the book, and then I'll do that.
I'll start that. And I also want to say, hi, Noah. One of my star students from my MFA program from the East Coast is here with us virtually, which I'm excited about. So Vigil Harbor is a place, a fictional place. And this novel is very much about how a place exerts an influence on everyone who lives there. So I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs here. Let's say it's true that geography is destiny, place entwined with person. Would living on a peninsula, promontory, headland, bluff, make you peninsular by nature? Not someone who sticks out, but someone who likes backing up to a body of water, who finds a cul-de-sac comforting, not cornering. You'd miss out on casual, unpredictable commerce with travelers merely passing through, because your town would be a place of beginnings and endings, of retreat or stasis. And after a while, you'd likely notice a sameness to your neighbors. You'd all be a bunch of proud peninsulites, privileged, but also myopic. That's how some outsiders see the people of Vigil Harbor, a town that thrusts itself into the Atlantic Ocean, all but completely enclosed by restless water, deflecting the longshore current like a crooked foot aimed straight toward the rising sun. On a map, the harbor itself resembles a long blue parcel held snug beneath a muscular arm against the Massachusetts coastline. At the big toe, two of the town's oldest roads rise toward a park with a view raised high by granite cliffs. The shoreline here is rugged with rock, nothing like the bygone aprons of silken sand that once turned neighboring towns into summer playgrounds. Much of that sand recently eroded by pummeling rains and swallowed by storms that no longer repay the ground they borrow. Okay, Deb, let's hear you.
Okay, how is it?
It's
Better?
Okay.
Oh, okay, this is great. So that was a nice introduction to one of the many voices that we hear in this book. That one, that voice that is kind of the everywhere of the town appears at points throughout the book, but then there are many other characters. That is more of an omniscient perspective, but there are many other characters. And let's talk a little bit about how you built this book and where it came from and how it all started, because actually we took a big detour. I mean, you started out with an idea of an architect on the coastline at a time of climate troubles and there was a possible mermaid saga in it. You know, when you first had the idea, it was a wonderful, intriguing notion. But tell us what happened and how you took a detour and how I took a detour with you.
So first of all, I have to say to everyone here that I have had the extraordinary good fortune of working with Deb Garrison on all 7 of my books. This is actually my 7th book, not my 6th. And that's very rare. So we've actually been working for more than 20 years, because 20 years ago last month is when my first novel, 3 Junes, came out. And Deb, along with my wonderful agent, is one of the 2 people who gets to kind of look under the hood while I'm working on this book. I do not have a writing group. I'm not secretive, but I didn't come up in a writing community, so I write alone until I'm really ready to show stuff. But I usually show, when I've written a few chapters, I send them to Deb. So back when I started working on this book, and Deb, I don't remember what year it was, but it wasn't 10 years ago, but close to it. And
yeah,
like all my books, it came to me really with one character in a sort of complex situation. I wanted to write about an architect, and I live in this coastal town in Massachusetts called Marblehead. And if you know it and you read Vigil Harbor, you'll recognize Vigil Harbor as topographically, it is completely Marblehead. It is this peninsula town. And I was really fascinated by the notion of people who still insist on living by the coast. What would it be like to write about an architect who builds houses that are designed to withstand the kind of extreme weather that we are experiencing on all the coasts, but particularly on the Atlantic coast of the United States? And what would be the situation? Many of the characters in my books have secrets in their past. And I thought, what if this very successful architect who's happily married, he has a wife and a stepson, and the stepson is a very important character in this novel. But way back, decades ago, when he started his career in New York City, he had an intense, passionate relationship with a seductive young woman who was very artistic, but also believed herself or presented herself as, a being from under the ocean. And I thought, I thought maybe a mermaid, and I'm also interested in Selkies. I think living by the sea as I do makes me very interested in the lore and the legends of the sea. But on the other hand, those people who know my work from before know that, magical realism and fantasy are not exactly my normal terrain. And I kind of thought, was I struck on the head by a heavy object here? Like, what's going on? But I thought, I'm going to explore this and how this secret might emerge in his successful, mature adult life. That a woman from the past who was also in love with this woman whose name was Isa shows up in Vigil Harbor, determined to find out what became of Isa. And so that was the core of the,
which is still actually very much in the book.
It is still in the book. It is.
But a lot changed as well.
Right. So what happened in a nutshell is that I felt over my head, which is kind of water over my head. Mm-hmm. I had a very hard time going forward. I wrote quite a lot of it, and I created other characters, because that's how a story comes to be for me. Out of that one character that I first conceive of, the characters in that person's life appear to me, and I grow them. And it's kind of like branches from a tree. And the choices that those characters make and the relationships they form are the plot of the book. But I found myself procrastinating a lot. And I describe myself as a serial monogamist when it comes to writing novels. I am with one set of characters, one novel, until publication do us part. And then I begin to conceive of the next book. I don't have, novels lined up like playing.
You don't have any side flings. Yeah.
I'm always jealous of people who say, oh, I'll just go work on that other novel while I'm, this one isn't going so well. So what happened though was that I began to cheat on my novel with 3 other characters that I was thinking about: a British movie star, the assistant to a famous children's book illustrator, and a museum curator. And people who read my last book, A House Among the Trees, will recognize the people from that novel. And I felt so guilty, but I couldn't help myself. And so I set this book aside, something I've never done. And I wrote another novel. And when I finished with that novel, which was in 2017, when that novel was published, I had to decide, am I going to return to this novel? And 2017 was a year that was very different from the year that I had stopped working on this novel, for many reasons. And when I look back, and I had to kind of look this up when I realized I was going to be talking about this book, because I have a very clear memory. And I looked back, and it was June 1st of 2017. I was pulling into my garden center to buy a tree, and NPR was on, and our president was about to make an announcement, and everyone knew what he was going to say, but I thought, there's no way he's going to say this. So I sat in the parking lot, and then I heard our president withdraws from the Paris Climate Accord. And I actually cried. I sat in the car and I cried. I thought, do these people have children? What's happening here? However flawed the Paris Climate Accord might have been, it was insane to me. And then that year was actually a year of really, really extreme weather. There were 17 named storms, 10 of which were hurricanes, 3 of which were Harvey, Irma, and Maria, which devastated the Gulf Coast and Puerto Rico, which I don't think, has recovered to this day from Maria. So suddenly weather and the absolute, I don't know how to describe it, not deafness of our bureaucracies and government to things that clearly urgently need to be done. This was very much on my mind, and I began to see this novel as a place where, what if the volume was really turned up on the things that are so dire for us, not just climate change, but political divisiveness, immigration policies, women's access to abortion. And that's when I got the idea that this novel would take place a dozen years in the future. I wasn't interested in dystopia. I wasn't interested in writing about some post-apocalyptic country where, we've been bombed back to the Stone Age or whatever. But I wanted to write about a community and relationships that very much resemble our world now, but where something that's changed is that climate activists have become terrorists, have decided that the only way to be heard is through violence. So the world is a more violent place. It's not that there are huge wars going on. There are no nuclear bombs being deployed. And the people of Vigil Harbor, meanwhile, who are affluent, mostly white, very privileged, also mostly very liberal-minded, have this illusion that they're somehow insulated from these forces of the outside world. And of course, it is an illusion that is shattered within the course of this novel, which takes place over only a few days. Although you get to know the principal characters very deeply. You get to know their past, their history with COVID and beyond is incorporated there. And as you know, Deb,
yeah,
COVID arrived when I had basically finished a draft of this book. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Because clearly COVID is in
part of that world. Yes.
And of course, who knew whether we were going to wait 5 years for a vaccine? So I had to manipulate the novel to work that in.
But it was such a crucial moment when the book, I think, well, a couple of things for me as an editor, this had never happened to us before. You had always been on whatever project and we watched it through to completion. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was very interesting to have you call me and say, I think I just have to go in this other, I'm passionate about these other characters right now. And it was a moment which I find occasionally in our work, working with writers, where instead of saying, wait a minute, we had a plan and we have a contract and we have, we need to follow our plan. It's so often the most important thing for me to do is to say, okay, we're going on a detour, we're going on an adventure. And the most important thing in a way is to kind of go with a writer where they need to go, because there often turns out to be some strange reason why it is the adventure has to happen the way it does. And in this case, I really feel what was so crucial was your discovering then that the book that things had ratcheted up. I mean, it's actually the fact that you had this idea for a kind of climate themed book now seems kind of quaint looking back to when you start. I mean, we knew climate was an issue, but boy, was it not as much of an issue as it is now. And then when you sort of saw that it would be a little bit of a book set in the future, which you had never done before. So it turned out that you, in coming back to it after doing House Among the Trees, you somehow had put yourself in this other place where you were pushing yourself into a new space, as it were, that was really exciting. And one thing I love about the book is that though it's set in the future, as you say, it is also very much recognizably it's like some of the worst of our world, but of course we haven't solved a lot of the, all the things. It's a little discouraging because some of the things we hope we will have solved in 10 years or 12 years. It's about a dozen years in the future, unfortunately haven't really solved them. But at the same time, say that again.
People are coping and compensating.
Yes, we see some of the coping and the compensating that's happened. And at the same time, though, I will say it's very much a recognizably Julia Glass novel in that it is very much realism, despite the presence of a character who may or may not have come from the ocean. The kind of realism and the way that we get to know people and the way that you thread the different stories of people is really very much signature. So it's a wonderful combination of a new frontier for you, but also your way of storytelling, which I think readers, some readers, have been there before and will recognize, but for new readers is incredibly exciting and fun to delve into a world. And here, because you're really focused on a town, and place is such a character often in your books.
Yes.
Here we really have a sense of the layers of the town and the different characters involved in this story. And actually Austin, the architect, not that he's not an important character, but in some ways his importance a little bit lessened as you developed, don't you think? As you found the people around him and the people who would enter into this crucial, tense couple of days in the Vigil Harbor world. Some others kind of came to the forefront, and maybe some of them surprised you. So I wanted to ask you about, I am going to ask you to read a little bit about a couple of the characters, but just first, if you can introduce maybe a couple of, who were your favorites to write and who was difficult to write, and just introduce a couple of them to our listeners.
So there are 8 narrators in this that alternate through this, and 7 of them are residents of Vigil Harbor. One of them is Petra, the woman who comes from Austin's past, who was in love with Issa and is sort of bent on a, if not revenge, sort of some kind of redemption there. So she very much unsettles things. There's also another stranger who comes to town, but I won't go into that. But because I don't plot a novel, because I write forward into the dark, as it were, I'm always surprised at characters that didn't seem terribly important, perhaps, and suddenly I fall in love with them, and I really want, and they become much more important. And probably the character that surprised me the most is Austin's stepson, Brecht, who is a 21-year-old, a young man who was in college in New York and has come home to Vigil Harbor in a kind of shell-shocked state because he survived something very violent and he's recovering his life. And he's working for a Guatemalan landscaper who lives in town named Celestino. And readers of mine will recognize Celestino from The Widower's Tale, where he was a very important character. And he's someone who, I just really wanted to bring back as important. You don't have his point of view, but he's now married to a woman who grew up in Vigil Harbor, Connie, and she's someone with a tragedy of her own. Her brother died serving in Afghanistan, and she bears that as a chip on her shoulder, her only sibling. So she is also an important character. And then I had a lot of fun with, Vigil Harbor is a town where the yacht club is very important. And there's a kind of, upscale sailing society. At Marblehead, where I live, has 5 yacht clubs. And I thought if I give this town 5 yacht clubs, nobody would believe it. So there's 1 yacht club. And there's a scandal in the beginning, which is that 2 couples, 50-something empty nesters who are members of the yacht club, one member of one couple leaves her spouse for a spouse from the other couple. So husband and wife run away together, leaving their spouses completely bamboozled, mortified by being the subject of this high profile scandal, and kind of thrown together by that scandal. And those are Margot and Mike, and their characters were very different. She's this, firebrand, retired English teacher with kind of a, sailor's mouth. And he's this shy marine biologist who's struggling to save the salt marshes of the North Shore of Massachusetts. And she's determined to kind of, make something of him so that he doesn't just wilt away with heartbreak. And their grown children have opinions about their lives. So these are some of the characters who come together in the novel. There are others too, but I think that
that's a start. Well, and I will say, before I ask you, I'm going to ask you to read that a little bit of Margot and Mike, who get thrown together by their spouses' departures, because they weren't really pals. They kind of knew each other a bit, but they weren't really pals.
And their children went to school together, as happens. Their children went through school together and had play dates, but
yeah, they weren't close. But
right.
Before that, I will say I want to give a special plug for Celestino. And one of the things I love about working with you, and I think readers who've read you through many books will connect with this, is seeing characters, even though nothing is a sequel. I mean, you can pick up any one of Julia's books and dive into a whole fresh world. But if you happen to have been reading her, you'll realize that sometimes you meet someone who's connected to someone from a past book. There's kind of a web of your world. And one of your books was based on a seed that was in 3 Junes. There was a little thing in 3 Junes that I guess was something that a little happening that had stayed with you, and you had wondered what would become of that in a later period.
That was, yes, and Dark Sacred Night.
And the Dark Sacred Night. And that whole book came out of this tiny little seed that was on page, 357 of 3 Junes.
Into the book. But that came about because there was a character from 3 Junes that I fell in love with, but I couldn't give her more space.
Yeah, she was not, yeah.
The mother of Malachi Burns, the music critic who has a book. And I don't know why, but I so wanted to write more about her. So when I thought, how can I write about her? I went back and found, again, it's a secret. There's a little secret at the end of that book. And that secret gave
you what you needed to construct a whole other novel. And the thing is, again, you don't have to have read the 3 Junes to read in the Dark Sacred Night and love that book. So Celestino is a favorite character. And it's interesting that here we see him more refracted through Connie, his wife, who's a new character, who's a Vigil Harbor native. But he's a very important presence in the story, and especially because he's an immigrant, and even though he's now been in this town for quite a while and has his child here, and they have kind of a homeschool at their house, there is his presence and the way that he interacts, and he has a very important role in the book. But anyway, I love meeting him again and seeing what became. I loved The Widower's Tale. That's a terrific book, and he was a big character there. But anyway, it's just fun to get these little Easter eggs of finding characters who you may have met before or not. But anyway, that for me has been a particular pleasure. But just back for a minute to Margot and Mike, the spouses who were left. Will you read just one other section where Margot kind of comes, Mike is feeling sorry for himself after he's been ditched, and
Mike's reaction to his spouse, leaving him, and they had no idea their spouses had been having an affair for years. Was his reaction is to just curl up in a ball in his house in Vigil Harbor. And now I have to. Do you have the page number on that? Because okay. Oh, here it is. So you want me to read that whole scene there?
If you could, just that'll be a fun thing, and then we can get questions from people as well. We'll have time for both.
Mike speaking, and by the way, his wife announced to him that she was leaving him for Margot's husband the night after a big banquet at the yacht club. So.
And wait, do you say in this passage where they're going? You have to tell. That's kind of funny.
So they're going to the survivalist community in I think it's northern Wisconsin. It's the Midwest. Sometimes I forget my exact locales. So with these they have new names, new identities, and they've already skipped town. So this is Mike. I drank too much, bourbon my poison of choice, and ate very little. One night I emptied a jar of almonds, almost literally pouring them down my gullet, as I thought with grim, illogical glee of how much that jar had cost, trying to recall precisely when almonds had become a gastronomic luxury comparable to caviar now all but unobtainable, no matter how much money you cared to spend. So many curiously random foods a thing of the past. Passion fruit, vanilla beans, certain kinds of tea, never mind codfish. I tried not to imagine Dee and that absurdly giraffish man fucking in the tiger maple 4-poster bed she had bought on our honeymoon in Nantucket. Failing to shut out those images, I took to sleeping down the hall in the twin bed once occupied by my son Egon. Every night when I turned out the lamp, I found myself drunkenly astonished that those plastic stars and planets I had affixed to the ceiling still, decades later, glowed so resolutely in the dark. I awoke every morning to behold, through my jackhammer headache, a time-warped poster of some ambisexual movie star playing Macbeth, reminder of yet further anxiety. A child well past childhood who wants to be an actor, or is an actor when he can be. Worse, a child living in New York City. I knew it was unsustainable, my gloomy retreat, and I knew I would have to move, sell the house. I would have to ask Egon and Miranda to come home one final time and sort through their childhood relics. I would also have to start answering my phone, or at least looking to see exactly whom I was ignoring. Egon and Miranda were the callers I dreaded the most, and I wondered if, had they lived closer, one or both of them would have materialized at the door on a mission of mercy. As if my wondering had summoned it, on day 8 of my self-exile, the second Sunday, the front door knocker sounded, vigorously, leading me to assume it was a man, though it was too vigorous to signal the arrival of my gentle son. Deluded has become my middle name. Please tell me you are taking that whore for everything she's fucking worth. Standing on my granite stoop was Margot Tattersall, whom I had last seen at the yacht club dinner, the final hours of my evidently willful ignorance, possibly hers as well, our last conjugal supper. When I failed to answer her challenge, she asked if she could come in. Could I say no? Why didn't I want to say no? Casting an eye over the teetering stacks of cereal bowls and highball glasses in the sink, she said, another woman would sigh with compassion and put this place back in order. She stared at me fiercely, but then she did sigh with compassion, and her tone softened. I know it's noon, but I know we need a drink, and I see from the contents of the sink that you have not been shirking in that department. Let me guess, a diet of cornflakes washed down by Manhattans. She lifted a glass from the sink and sniffed it. Am I a genius or what? She said. And from a canvas shoulder bag, she pulled out a bottle of, yes, bourbon. She ordered me to find or clean 2 glasses. As I obeyed, Margot said, so what did you do to drive the spouse away? Are you blaming this on me? I said, the first words out of my mouth since her arrival. Of course not. But the general assumption around town was that you and that whore led a peaceful coexistence, probably spiced up with torrid sex. The absent-minded science guy being the male version of the smoking hot librarian. I mean, you were just about the only couple who never fell into a boozy squabble at one of the club dinners. Oh, they're so simpatico. And he's so smart, she drawled. I don't know who would say that, I said. Most people there found me a crashing bore. Hearing myself assess my reputation at the club in the past tense, I realized that I would resign. This felt like a glimmer of good news. I loved the sailing, but I hadn't raced in years. Who knew, I asked, about them? Not me, said Margot. I'd have had your wife's head on a platter, Salome style. If others knew, I will find out, and I'll decapitate them promptly, impale their heads on the tallest masts in the harbor. This did not sound like a woman with a broken heart. A wounded ego, sure. Yet Margot was one of the club wives I had always vaguely enjoyed. She never hid her opinions. She was an accomplished solo sailor, and it was hard not to notice what a sexy dancer she was at the banquets. A little overweight by social standards, she wore dresses that told the world she liked her shapely shape. Do your children know? I asked. I told Tom I'd slit his throat if he didn't let me break the news. I do wonder if Cynthia knew already. Her outrage sounded a little synthetic. She's his favorite, but I forgive her. She asked about Egon and Miranda. When I admitted I hadn't spoken with them yet, she took a slug of her bourbon and actually whistled. Because I've been answering calls selectively. Oh, Mike. Jesus, Mike. You're a good man, but you are kind of a coward, aren't you? Perhaps my not feeling offended by Margot's remark only proved her right. In answer to your first question, she's left me with practically everything. Ouch. Now that's emasculating, isn't it? Almost stunning, the sound of my own laughter. So let's get you out of this house, she said. She picked up a peppermill shaped like a Balinese dancer. Away from all her tacky bourgeois shit. That is step one of your rehabilitation. Who asked you to rehabilitate me? I said. I need a new hobby. I've chosen you. So that's Mike and Margot.
I love that. And we see how we will, as we read the book, we see how this develops, which is delightful. And so I want to invite people to begin to put, I'll start, feeding you some questions if people have questions to put in the Q&A section. And I'll start with one of my own, which is just, which I sort of know the answer, but I just love to hear you reflect on, this is kind of it's a dark world. As we said, a lot of our problems haven't been solved. How do you keep, well, I guess I'll answer for you. I know you have hope for your characters, and I want to ask you how do you keep that hope? Because in some sense, even with a very dark backdrop, you've got terrorism, you've got climate problems, you've got bad immigration policies, you've got post-COVID, all of it. You do seem to keep hope for your people, and I wonder, how do you do that for book after book?
Look, I am an optimist, and I would never write a book that didn't have hope. I mean, there's always heartbreak. Characters have to suffer through tragedies, and characters help one another get through. I mean, I think the connectedness of communities, of families, is something that's always at the, it's the beating heart of all my books. I mean, when I read that scene, I mean, there's a lot of humor in this book. I think there's some satire and there's humor. There is darkness, but I don't feel that it's a dark book. I mean, and I hope I'm not wrong there. I mean, I think one of the things that I feel looking at the world is, I try very hard to do what I can, to do the right thing, as it were. But, and I don't feel that we should just sit back and hope that some geniuses are going to fix climate change by the way, that some geniuses got the vaccine for COVID. I mean, I don't know if people remember that Anthony Fauci said at the beginning of COVID, the soonest we've ever gotten a vaccine is 5 years. 5 years. If you read that piece by Lawrence Wright, and I don't want to go off the track too much, if you read that piece by Lawrence Wright in the New Yorker, January of 2021, I think, about how the vaccine came to be, I wept. Those men and women who, it's like they were waiting for their moment. I mean, there are brilliant people fixing, helping, doing, and we have to support those people, and and if we can, be those people. So I think that you finish this book feeling buoyed by how people continue to go on, continue to console and support one another, as we must console and support one another. We will make sacrifices, and we will give things up, whether it's almonds or codfish or whatever. But I like to believe that we have the ingenuity and the determination and the optimism to adapt. So, I guess.
Well, that's a wonderful answer, and I appreciate your putting it so eloquently, because I always feel uplifted by your books, even when, as you say, there's tremendous heartbreak, which there has been much in your work. But anyway, one does feel buoyed, and this book is another one of those. So why don't let me give you some of the questions from our audience. one person says that they had the great fortune of receiving an advanced reader's copy of Vigil Harbor, so got to read it before it came out. It was wonderful. I'm reading from this question. Which character do you envision possibly revisiting in later novels? Ooh.
That's a really good question. You know, it's honestly too soon to tell. I mean, gosh, I love Brecht, but I really don't know. You know, I said this in an event the other night that when a character returns, it's kind of like, imagine that you give a dinner party and you're washing the dishes and thinking what a great evening it was. And suddenly there's a knock on the door and it's one of the guests and they say, "I'm sorry, I left my shawl." And they come in and then they don't leave. They just like stay. So it's always a surprise to me when a character, you know, knocks on the door and wants, except I guess for that one character from 3 Junes in The Dark Sacred Night. So I don't know. And I also want to say, because this is a question I get sometimes, I don't think I'm done with Fenno McLeod, you know, who is, you know, my first true, you know, my first protagonist from 3 Junes. But I'm already glimpsing a new book, and so far nobody has joined from a previous book, but it's too soon to tell.
Okay, well, we won't hold you to that because, you know, somebody could sneak in. There are 2 remarks from Candace. She says she hopes to see Issa and Mike collaborate in a future book, which is interesting because they're both, you know, marine people. And then she also asks, she says, I found it such a breath of fresh air to read a book set in the near future that acknowledges the darkness ahead and yet shows how we will keep muddling through, not heroic, but realistic and hopeful. Were you ever tempted to make it darker?
Darker. I don't think so. I mean, I wrote true to my optimism. It's not that I don't read very, very dark books. I'll tell you that a book I read last fall, and it's a very dark book, and yet I kind of laughed when I finished it. Is the book, and I recommend it highly. It's a book called 2034 by Elliot Ackerman and General Stavridis, and it supposes that 2034, which is the year in which Vigil Harbor takes place, that year we enter World War III. And the interesting thing about it, I actually called the book Tom Clancy Meets Julia Glass because it's told from different points of view, like, you know, a Chinese general and an American, you know, commander and a CIA agent and a, you know, Air Force pilot. And I love the structure of it. But I thought, you know what? If this is what was happening in 2034, my characters would have a whole lot more to worry about than the salt marshes of the North Shore and you know, whether there's this mermaid here. You know, it's so I read books that are very dark often, and I feel that they're cautionary tales. That's what I like to feel. But I am not writing cautionary tales. I'm writing books that I hope get people talking about what we need to do.
Great. Okay, couple more here. Do you sail? And which of the 5 yacht clubs in Marblehead is your favorite and why? From Susan.
Susan, I don't know. I didn't see. Okay, so I am happy to be ballast. You know, if you have a boat, you want to invite me along, I am there as long as I'm not given great responsibility. You know, I'll hold a line. I am not a sailor. I love the sea. I love living by the sea. I love paddling in the sea. Please don't take me out when there are weather watches. I'm not going to be in a race. And you know what? Have only lived here 17 years, and in Marblehead, you're not a real header.
You sound like you're a newbie, right? Yeah.
Why am I a newbie? It's 17 years is a nanosecond. There are people who claim to be 11th generation here. So there is a club called the Corinthian Yacht Club, which is one of the fancier ones. And the porch of the Corinthian has one of the most stunning views of our harbor. And if a member of the Corinthian invites me for a drink on that porch, I am there. So there's also a cute little one called the Dolphin that I also love. So anyway, I'm
okay. And here's one about Brecht, the character you mentioned, who's 21 and has come home from New York. She asks, how did you develop Brecht's voice? His slang seems unique to me. how did you base it on the voice of anyone you know?
So no, I didn't. Here's the interesting thing. I thought about, okay, so 12 years in the future, anybody who's had teenage kids knows that language evolves the most quickly and eccentrically in the mouths of our young people, partly because they sort of want to, they want to speak in their own lingo. And so it's Brecht whose vocabulary, and it's mainly some adjectives and adverbs that are different. And, because he's the first voice in the book, you have to kind of get used to it. But I think you do get used to his, stooge is a word for crazy. Max is a word like for amped up. Fitzt is a word that means pissed off and angry. But most of the other characters are older, and their vocabulary is affected very little by that. So it's really, he's the one character who reflects, a new slang that has emerged.
That has evolved beyond, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an interesting one. A reader is in the midst of reading all of Ivy Compton Burnett. A friend recommended her.
Oh.
Have you read her? I was wondering what a modern writer thinks of her and her style.
That's a really good question. I have not read Ivy Compton Burnett. But, is she, I'm thinking in my mind that I sort of associate her with Barbara Pym. Is that wrong? Deb, you would know.
Well, I'm not sure because I have not read Ivy Compton Burnett either. So Dorothy, we need to have a separate book club with you to read Ivy Compton Burnett. I think I associate her a little bit like that too. But I'm not an expert at all.
In my 20s, I read a lot of Barbara Pym. I read a lot of, who wrote Hotel du Lac? That I think also a British female writer. And I'm really interested in returning to writers like, I think Elizabeth Hardwick is someone that was a teenager.
Yeah.
There are all these sort of British writers from the 1940s and 50s that I think are having a kind of renaissance. And it's on my longer list to get back.
Anita Bruckner, somebody typed for you. Yes.
And I read a lot of Anita Bruckner, and I don't know if Ivy Compton Burnett fits in that, but I think maybe. And I'm thank you for putting her back on my radar.
Okay, well, we all have to jump in on. Thank you for that question. And then just a couple more. Noah says, I'm so surprised to hear about a magical realist character, the romantic possible merwoman. Is she one of the 8 points of view? And if so, is her narrative style aquatic in nature? Ooh.
Great question, Noah.
Good one.
No, I never considered her as a point of view. I think, so I leave it to the reader to decide, whether there is indeed something magical and supernatural about her. That, and it's interesting. I did a radio interview the other day where the guy who was interviewing me said, what a completely crazy woman, and in his mind, there's no possibility that she was really a Selkie, which I think is sort of what I came out toward. There's, seals are very important in the book. So, whereas I'd started
where I actually believed, I have to admit, I sort of much of the way believed that she possibly was actually.
And I don't want to be coy about this, but I've left it to the reader really to decide, because, Austin and Petra, this woman who comes to town bent on finding out what became of Isa, are on opposite sides of what they believe about the woman who absolutely captivated the two of them. But to write from Isa's point of view, I think would have, there would be no mystery. So,
yes, part of the mystery around her is our seeing her refracted through different points of view. And because you write so much about relationships, marriages, couplings, friendships, fracturings of these, in a way, she's kind of a figure that heightens that drama on either side.
I did not expect to write about in terms of Isa that I did toward the end is when Austin's wife, Miriam, really confronts him about what the hell was this relationship in his past. Her son Brecht speaks to her about it, and he has kind of, you know, like a third-hand vision of how his mother should see that past relationship in his stepfather's life, which I kind of enjoyed touching on.
So this might be the last one, and I hope I haven't missed anyone in here. Oh, this is interesting. Have you read Jane Gardam's work?
No, and I have some of her books on my shelf.
Oh, you would love. I think you would love it.
Oh, okay. So yes, I think when I picked up a couple of her books once, and they're among the many, many books I own that I have not read yet. So thank you also for putting her back on my radar.
Great. Now, is there anything else? I'm going to just quickly look to see if I don't think I missed any questions. So maybe we're sadly ready to say goodbye, but what a delightful time talking to you, Julie.
Well, thank you so much, Deb. It's always so much fun. I hope we can do it again.
Well, we will if you keep writing.
That's right.
I've written 4 pages of the next book. So we'll see. I started on an airplane with the laptop like this a couple of weeks ago. You can write anywhere.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Julie. Thank you so much, Deb, for this wonderful conversation. A final reminder that if you haven't picked up your copy already, 3 June, or sorry, not 3 Junes, Vigil Harbor is out and hardcover. 3 Junes is also out, and you may also purchase it. We do have signed book plates. Julie very thoughtfully sent us these beautifully illustrated book plates, probably
oceanic.
in like
they're slightly oceanic. Yes.
Yeah, these are like in the top 3 book plates that we've I think received over the last 3 years. So congratulations on that, Julie. But book plates, if you order online, we'll include a book plate with your order. We have a bunch of book plates up here at our Lake Forest Park store. Come grab your copy. Any final thoughts before we leave everyone tonight?
No, you know, I just want to say, you know, thank you all for continuing to support your independent bookstores in this really crazy time we're living in.
Yeah, thank
you. And, you know, just keep the faith and keep reading. And Deb, you know, I hope you're my editor forever. And
It's my pleasure. And I would say while you're ordering Vigil Harbor, go for maybe The Widower's Tale, because then you'll get to go back and find out the backstory of Celestino, which is really a terrific, well, it's like choosing between our children, but in any case, that would be my other Julia backlist tip. Go for The Widower's Tale and Vigil Harbor, of course.
All my books can be read in any order. There's no prequels and sequels, just,
yeah.
You know.
And thank you for hosting us. What a pleasure. From coast to coast.
Yeah. On behalf of Third Place Books and the Seattle community, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please have a wonderful evening and be well.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.